Your employees can get incentive structures for performance. You can still decide to manage things for growth versus dividends. Ultimately, the ownership is not to a shareholder, but it's to the greater good.
So welcome to the Shift Code, where I have conversations with senior leaders about innovation, transformation, and leadership. Alex Amouyel is the CEO of the Newman own foundation. In fact, it's a foundation, but also a corporation. She will explain us how that works. It's based on Paul Newman's original idea at the time, I think 42 years ago, that the company could be run totally really for purpose, with all the profit not paid to shareholders, but accumulated for a cause. And that cause in particular here is to help children who are facing adversity. So Alex, thank you so much for being with us. Let's start with you a little bit. So tell us a little bit this whole, like, your personal background. You're Algerian, you're French, you're British, you're American. What's your story?
Well, thank you so much. And I'm delighted to be here. I grew up in Paris. My dad was French from Algeria. My mother was British, is British, but also via, Russia and other places. So I'm the daughter and granddaughter of refugees and an immigrant myself to the country of the United States. So now I'm French and British and American. I collect passports. And I would say from a very young age, I wanted to help improve the world. I started and quit a PhD in cancer research, and I went to teach English in Asia while figuring out what to do. I then tried to wanted to work in human rights. No one would pay me to do anything interesting in human rights. So I joined the Boston Consulting Group when I was 24 with the idea that, I could learn something and they would pay me. So that was great. I did that for 2.5 years. And it was really interesting. I learned a lot of project management skills and other really useful skills that I still use today in my job. But one of the pro bono projects I did was with my dream organization at the time, which was Save the Children. And I managed to actually get a job there as a project leader, which was very much project management type job. And then I did that for a few years and then moved to New York with the Clinton Global Initiative, and then to Boston with MIT Solve. And now I'm back in New York, but also in Westport with the Newman Zone Foundation.
So what did you learn in these nonprofits? Like, how is it the same, different?
Well, now my career, except for the 2.5 years at BCG, most of my career has been in nonprofits, but it's been, yes, between nonprofits, academias, foundations. Well, I think that I've learned that I don't think it's that different from corporations in a number of sense. There's certainly generally less resources and the mission comes first, that's for sure. But, I think there's all these tropes that the people are less good, or that the systems are less good, or that we're not thinking about innovation. I think that's really quite different. That's really not true, basically. And sometimes, we were talking, we're at this Masters of Scale summit together, but they're talking about, entrepreneurial is all about how do you innovate with constraints.
Yeah, which by the way is like the reality is that the more constraints, the more innovative you are, because
indeed,
you have to
absolutely.
be creative. Yeah.
And then, this is, I'm not going to say who the clients were when I was at BCG, but some of them were these big corporations with big matrix structures and et cetera. And, we were brought in because sometimes reasons where I was like, it's because the people who were there don't even know what their jobs are and how and so I didn't think some of my experience with corporations was not that they were the most efficient or innovative compared to the nonprofits that I've had the pleasure of working for.
And, it's not like always that rosy and easy.
It's not, but it's also, there are lots of amazing, innovative donors and lots of fun things you can do. And people, I think people who get it, it is, being generous is as much as improving the world as I think improving yourself and feeling good about and feeling good about it for yourself. But there are people who are really committed to that, and you get to see them at a point. It depends if it's an institutional funder or not, but where at a point of their life where they're really giving back and thinking about their legacy, and it's a big shift for them, and it's really interesting too.
So let's talk a bit about the Newman's own foundation and company. So how does it actually work? Your combination of foundation, a company, how is it architectured? What's the governance? Are you involved in both? How does it work?
Yeah, no, it's pretty unique, but there are more of us than you realize or you think. But so Newman's Own Foundation is our mission is to nourish and transform the lives of children who face adversity. We're a private 501c3 foundation. And what's pretty unique is that we own the food company, Newman's Own, which sells salad dressing, pasta, pizza, and all the profits and royalties from the sale of the products go to the foundation in service of our mission. So we're not funded by a rich donor who's thinking about their legacy, and we're not funded by a large endowment and distributing 5%. Give or take some reserves to smooth things over. Whatever we make the previous year, essentially plus or minus the reserves, we give away the next year. And that's pretty unique, but we're very happy that Patagonia joined the ranks of the people. They're structured slightly differently from us, but the outcome is the same. All the profits of Patagonia now go into C4, Hold Fast Collective. And yeah, there's a few others in the US, but also across the world who are structured the same. But you don't really know too much about us, or you don't necessarily, you're buying the products of these companies without necessarily realizing that as you're purchasing your products, the profits are going to good causes.
Oh,
But
I'm
that's
sure
pretty
it's on the
cool.
packaging, right?
We put it everywhere on the
And
packaging.
people don't even see it.
And yet people come up to me again at this conference every single day. They were like, I didn't realize. And I was like, look, you just picked up the cookies. Just read the cookie packet. I mean, it's great. It delights people. When they find out, they say, oh, I've been buying your salad dressing, or I love your pizza, whatever it is. When they find out, they're like, wow, like, that's so cool. And I'm like, yeah, it is so cool. So, but you've been doing this for 20 years. So you're one of our donors. Thank you. I joke with them, but I say thank you for your donation, because in one sense, that is true.
So are you personally involved in both the foundation and running the company, or do you have a different team running the company?
Different team, the church and state, as they would say. So yeah, the founder, to get sort of geeky about governance, as we love it. The foundation board nominates me, and I get instructions to nominate the board of the food company, and the food company has a CEO, has an executive chair and a CEO, and we need to keep, as I'm, the dollars and me as a human and our resources at the foundation should be used for charitable activities. So we cannot get involved in commercial activities. And then the opposite is also true. The commercial company can't say, oh, you have to give money to this charity because we think this will help us sell more pizza or whatever. It has to be kept separate.
It's interesting
But
because
we own
PMI
it.
is almost the opposite model.
Yeah. Tell us,
where
how does it work at PMI?
yeah,
I'm interviewing you now.
yes. So PMI is a 501c6. So it does have its board elected by our members, and we do have resources coming from our business, and the reserves sit there. And then we have a foundation that we call the PMI EF Foundation, which is also at arm's length, but funded by us, by PMI. We don't put all our surpluses to the foundation. Some of that goes to other activities that we have. But yes, it's let's say, different model, but there are some similarities.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you're cousins then. I'll call you cousins to us, but yeah, delighted that you're a cousin.
So how do you plan for your projects and programs when you're not sure about how much profit will come? I mean, you have reserves, but
I mean, that is the question. Again, the good news back in the day, just to be clear, Paul started Newman's Own back in 1982, and with his longtime friend A. Hotchner, and they invested $40,000 of their own funds to get some bottles of salad dressings on the shelves. And then pretty quickly, the first year they turned this in a profit of $300,000, and then 1 million, and then they were off to the races. We have given away over $600 million to good causes. So there's a philanthropic return of investment of $40,000 turning into 600 million, which is pretty incredible. You can do this calculation at home. But the foundation didn't exist initially. What happened is that from what I understand, is just whatever profits they made that same year, Paul would just take out his checkbook and go, okay, we made $1 million. And then he would just write the checks at Christmas time to children's hospitals, to different things, etc. The foundation, I think, was initially set up in like 98 and then really started getting operational in 2005. And he died in
it's also more tax advantageous, I would
yeah,
assume.
but it's really when he died in 2008, he gifted the food company to the foundation.
Right.
And that was actually illegal at the time, technically. We would have had to disinvest from it. We got an IRS exemption twice for 5 years. And then the law changed with the passing of the Philanthropic Enterprise Act in 2018, making a structure legal. But yeah, so yeah, back in the day, it was just like, okay, we made this amount of profit. This is how much we have to give away. Now we try and be a little bit more responsible to sort of long-term partners that we have, such as Serious Fund Children's Network, Food Corps, a number of people, because we want to invest in them longer term. But it is, we are at the vagaries of the food business, and that there are definitely some headwinds right now, for example. And that's why I think they started having a reserve policy like a decade ago or something, to be able to say plus or minus. In the better years, we save a bit of money. In the not so good years, we take out some bit of money from the reserves to help smooth that over, so that we're not, if there's a good year or a bad year, and if it's not suddenly like this.
I'm interested in understanding on one side how you behave as a shareholder, as the owner of the company, and on the other side, how you use that money to help children in need. So if we talk about your role as a shareholder, do you manage or govern this organization, this company, the company side, like you would do if you were like a private equity firm? Do you push them to maximize profit? Because in the end, those are the resources you get.
So that we're trying to manage it like more of a family office or a holding company, I would say, which is as much as possible in perpetuity, but perhaps differently than maybe a family office is. But, you could argue, I don't think, we have the recipe for this. And Patagonia, has done this as of September 2022. And yes, we created, and we can talk about this a little bit, a network called the 100% for Purpose Club. It's super original as a name, but it's all the companies that are giving all their profits away. And these things come up, especially we have some companies, notably out of Australia and different places. Humanitics is an event ticketing company, which gives all its profits away. It's, I think, 8 years old. It's given away already 10 million. Can't remember if it's Australian dollars or US dollars, but pretty cool regardless. And there's also Thank You, which is out of Australia. Those places they're growing quite a bit, and they're expanding into new markets. The UK for Humanitics after the US, and Asia for Thank You. And a big question is indeed, you need capital for expansion. Do you not give the profits away for X number of years while you expand into different countries? Or some of what they've done, which is very cool, is find capital from other sources to be able to continue giving the money away from their, say, Australia operations, and then be able to invest for their expansion using different capital. And that mix of capital is grants, but also loans or these sort of pay it forward loans where the Atlassian Foundation, for example, helped Humanitics and said, we'll give you a loan and then you pay it back to a nonprofit with interest. But so ultimately it doesn't come back to Atlassian, it goes to a nonprofit, but under as a sort of pay it forward loan, which is pretty cool.
So, right. So I'll go back to how you spend the money, but let's move to this topic of expansion of the same model. Let's say, do you really think that all companies in the world should operate that way and all profit should go to a for-cause organization? Do you think it's realistic? Does it make any sense?
I'm not a utopian idealist. This is not going to happen. I realize, but I think that I don't see in theory why that would be. I think it would be a great thing if, I'll already be delighted if 1% of companies in the world adopt this model. So just to be clear, but I think you can still, as a CEO, you can still get paid and your employees can get paid decent salaries. You can still create incentive structures for performance. You can still decide to manage things for growth versus dividends. It's just that ultimately the ownership, and there's also, we could talk about the employee ownership movement and all this thing. Ultimately, the ownership is not to a shareholder, and the concentration of wealth or public, if it's a public company, but it's to, the greater good.
I think this is pretty clear how you can incentivize employees and even management.
People do ask me that, but how do you pay your employees? And I'm like,
No, I think that you're right. But I see the problem potentially more in terms of capital allocation. Exactly what we discussed before. So companies sometimes need to raise a lot of money.
yeah, but you could still raise it. Most companies, so we're in San Francisco now at this massive scale summit, and they're all talking about AI. This is, and then none of these companies are making a profit for a really long time. So yeah, that doesn't really, that we're probably not in the environment. But most companies in the US and most companies in the world don't receive VC funding, and they self-fund or they get loans from banks or CDFIs or traditional lending institutions. And that means that they can retain ownership of their companies and then choose what to do with it. And so I think that within that structure, that is completely possible. And I do think that sometimes I'll just talk about my observations in food, right? We're obviously competing with very large food companies that are nearly oligopolistic, which is a dangerous thing in my view. And then we're also competing with a lot of private equity-backed food companies that are ultimately trying to sell themselves to these big oligopolies.
Usually spun off from the large companies at the time when they were trying to reduce number of brands and globalize and everything.
They have a lot of money to throw around for marketing and for et cetera, et cetera. And that's great for, in one sense, the consumer gets a discounted product because there's a lot more, they're not trying to make a profit. But it's actually distorting capitalism if you think about it. It's not like the inputs plus the value add equals fair price and then there's a profit in it. So I actually think that if more companies were like this and there was less, a lot of people would disagree with me on this, but you would actually be in a more normal form of capitalism. And there are still, you can still keep some of the companies that I've talked to in the network do have pretty large cash reserves and they are able to invest. And indeed, if they want to build a new plant or, they go to the bank, they don't, or to lenders, they don't go, it's not about equity and VC and A rounds and B rounds and et cetera, et cetera. So it definitely can work.
Have you seen the profit of the Newman's own company go down or their market being disrupted? And
Yes.
Can you talk about that and how you managed to go through those moments of disruptions or lower performance?
Yeah. I mean, you can, Foundation, you can download on 990s. It's gone up and down. It went quite a lot up in the years after Paul Newman died. I think that was a big question of like, once, because they didn't, they famously didn't do any marketing. They didn't have a plan. And Paul would just go on Oprah or whatever, and that would be the marketing plan, right? That
So
was
there was
the,
a lot of anxiety around what's going to
yeah,
happen after he dies.
there was a lot of anxiety. And then actually the sales and the profit and went up, and there was a lot of, and yeah, we've given away a lot more money since he died than when he was even though the periods are much longer. So that's pretty interesting. Now, now if you've looked the last few years, we haven't given away as much as maybe in the 2010s. And there's a lot of market dynamics in food that sort of explain some of that. And maybe there wasn't, you could say there wasn't enough investment in a number of innovation and things. And that's definitely something that we're working on. But I also think, it's a company that's existed for 43 years, which started with $40,000 and has given away 600 and something million dollars away. Most companies, unless you're one of these incredible Japanese companies that has been doing swords since the samurais and has existed for 300 years or whatever it is, or Pont-à-Mousson in France or something like that, who did the windows for the for Versailles. Most companies don't exist for all that
Well, even
long.
Pont-à-Mousson ended up being merged. And
Okay, yeah, exactly. I think of this as I hope we keep going for another 40 years and that indeed we have more and more profits and that we grow, etc. But I think of it as a philanthropic annuity, where it's, if Paul had just said, okay, we're going to give $40,000 to a children's hospital in 1982, that would have been it, right? Or if we built this thing with an endowment and we'd say, okay, we have $600 million in endowment and we give 5%, yes, it would be more, but like we wouldn't have given away all the money for the past 40 years. We would have had to wait till we got to
but
this
that could
point.
always be like a solution potentially, I would assume. If
Potentially, but
yeah,
that was not certainly in Paul's vision of, and endowments. Indeed, you're hoarding the money instead of, and, when you think of there's 1 in 5 children in this country living in food insecure households, you're like, okay, should we just miss a generation of children to to
no,
accumulate the
I'm just
money?
trying to think about the situation
Yeah.
where the business itself would need transformation to survive and thrive, and the current governance may hamper that. And what are the solutions, right? So one of them could be to sell it and get the money that you can then invest and generate the income. Yeah. If we wanted to expand that model, right?
I think it's possible, and I don't think that, the responsibility certainly I feel about wanting to help many other companies join this is that I don't think we have all the answers, nor should people follow exactly what
Yeah.
we've done. I want more and more of these companies to, and yet Patagonia's set up slightly differently. There's pros and cons to that, I would say, compared to our model. But I want more and more of these, and
No, I think it's
they
great
can
to
make their own
I think it's very
mistakes.
aspirational, right? So people will get
Yeah.
really excited with that, but they will also think about how capitalism, the way it works, has also enabled companies to overall be successful and grow and readjust. So how do you combine both, right?
To me, this is really about inscribing ourselves within capitalism and actually, and indeed, doing capitalism in a way that is almost, I would say, more pure. I mean, I don't want to get into
Yeah.
purity of capitalism, but so this is probably the wrong word.
At
But
least some noble goals,
yeah, yeah. And
and
which,
make competition maybe more
yeah,
healthy.
it's
Yeah.
a healthier competition. You're not overspending the money you don't have, making for companies who don't make a profit for X 20 or 30 years. You actually,
Creating value out of thin air and
yeah, you
yeah.
have to make a profit every year. That's, to me, that's capitalism at its best. So that, and yeah, and I think there will be other companies, or I know of other companies in our network which have a lot more, which have a lot more reserves and I wouldn't say that's us, but which are investing a lot for the future. There's one I think in particular, but I don't know that I can really share that. But who is, thinking to reinvent itself for various ways, but has a lot of cash to do so. And so and is taking more of a portfolio approach, is thinking about this as our cash cow, core business, and let's now like invest in a number of other things so that we can create this portfolio. Another example, which I think I can share, but it's because I also don't know them, but the Novo Nordisk, the largest foundation in the world, is now Novo Nordisk Foundation because they own not a full percentage, but a large percentage of the Novo Nordisk, the company, which makes Ozempic and all these GLP-1 wonder drugs. So now they are the largest foundation in the world because it's not 100%, but they own a significant percentage. They also own Novenzyme, and they own some other. So they're really a portfolio foundation, which is invested in across a number of healthcare biotech things. And yeah, they're funded by the profits of all these different companies that they've had.
Yeah.
So they,
Very Northern European.
yeah, there's a lot more of these examples in, the Rolex, Carlsberg, Bosch, all of these are these European steward foundation models. So there's a lot more of that.
Let's talk a little bit for like a minute about how you spend that money. Like, how do you manage that? Do you have your own programs, or do you subsidize other organizations?
We're a private foundation versus there's private foundations, private operating foundations, and public charities in the US under the 501c3 banner. And we're a private foundation, and so we shouldn't have our own product programs. If not, that would be private operating or public charities. So yeah, my job is not to write checks every day, but there is an element of, yes, we support. We make grants to a number of organizations across the US around this mission, nourishing and transforming the lives of children who face adversity. And that divides up into, we have a program on nutrition education and school food, and we have maybe 20 grantee partners in that field. We have a program on indigenous food justice. We have also about 20 grantee partners in that field. And then we also support a sister organization to us called Serious Fund Children's Network that Paul started in the mid-80s, and which is a network of summer camps for kids with cancer, rare blood disorders, HIV, AIDS,
Wonderful.
etc.
How do you select these organizations? For instance, do you assess their program or project management skills?
Yeah, we do in that sense. So some of them are long-term partners, such as Serious Fund Children Network, and this is more sort of conversations and they submit, different proposals. I would say that's slightly different. But when we think about new grantee partners, we run these open application pieces where we will open it up to anybody who wants to apply. So we're going to start it up at some point next year. The Food Justice for Kids Prize. You can be a nonprofit, tribe, or school in the United States, and you can submit an application. There's a platform called Just Fund, which is a common application, similar to university applicants. So we don't want to waste people's time because they have to do one for us and one for X and Y. So you submit it on this common platform. And then there are a number of criteria, and the criteria have to do with alignment to the mission. Are you actually doing food justice for kids, or you're not? You'd be surprised that some people submit applications that are not really working with kids, so that happens. Potential for impact, and this is, we think that, if they say what they are going to say, it's going to have an impact. Innovation, is it different from the status quo? Are they bringing up something new? But then there are criteria, I forget what it's called, but on sort of the team, and do we think that goes to project management. Do we think the team has the capabilities and capacities for execution and implementation? And there's 4 or 5 criteria, but we have a panel of external reviewers who mark people based on these criteria. And then at least when we did it 2 years ago, we then did interviews, and through these interviews, we had different opportunities to assess the skills of the CEOs and their teams.
Yeah. So Alex, I'd like to understand how you see the next 10 to 20 years. with all the things that are happening in the world right now, all the disruptions, AI driven, like you said, we're at the master of scale in San Francisco. Everybody's talking about this. Climate emergency, the deglobalization of the world, all these new dynamics between two blocks, maybe, and even the shapes of the blocks are not so clear. So how do you feel this is going to affect what you're doing? Does it make you worried, optimistic? Where are the risks, opportunities? Like, how do you see that?
I think when it comes to certainly our mission, which is around food justice for kids in the United States, certainly there are current dynamics which both make me hopeful and worried. The numbers are unconscionable, I would say. 1 in 5 children living in food insecure households in the US. That's the richest country in the world. Like, how is that possible morally, economically? We know how to solve this problem. The number of hungry kids went down significantly as one of the only silver linings of the pandemics, because there was all these cash transfers given to families and tax credits. And guess what? You give money to families and they buy food for their kids. Revolutionary. So we know how to solve this problem. It's a policy choice and one that people are not making. And so, yeah, when the pandemic benefits like expired, and that was in fact under the Biden administration, then the numbers went right back up. And now as we see what happened with the big beautiful bill with SNAP and other dynamics with the USDA and other things, the numbers of hungry kids in the US is going back up. I think the hope or the opportunity is there's a lot of great work being done at community level, at state level. Notably, we support an organization called Community Food Advocates in New York State. They helped organize a coalition, and the governor of New York passed free breakfast and free lunch for all kids in New York State. And that's almost 3 million kids who now can get 2 of their meals in school for free. And there's a lot more great work happening across the country at either the community or state level. And I think what I do like about working in food and working for kids is, one, this is really the next generation. It's the best investment you can make philanthropically in helping kids be set up for the future, because a hungry kid can't learn. They have behavioral problems. Versus a nourished kid will economic productivity, educational attainment, all of these things are unlocked with healthy food. And also it's something where we work on indigenous food justice. I mentioned you have all these concepts, including at massive scales, of regenerative agriculture, food is medicine. All of these are indigenous concepts that we as a humanity, but indigenous people in particular, have known for thousands of years. And so reclaiming this knowledge and helping people rethink about their relationship with farmers, with the land, with healthy food unlocks also, it's a solution to climate change. It's a solution to rural challenges. So that's what I do like, is that I'm not saying food is the magic bullet, but it really does touch on a lot of these issues and dynamics. And I think in a sense, it's about reclaiming and restoring this indigenous innate knowledge we have. And if we can do that through the work we do, that gives me optimism, even though I think right now the next few years are not going to be good for hungry kids, unfortunately.
Right. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
for being
much.
with us.